Disclaimer. Judge Ron Rangel is providing this podcast and website for educational purposes only, as well as to give the public general information regarding topics related to the criminal justice system. The views, thoughts, and opinions of his guest speakers are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Judge Rangel. All rise. You are now listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel, educating the public and expanding mindsets. Subscribe on our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform for more of the latest podcast episodes and updates.
Welcome to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. I am your host. Today we have a special edition for you. Today we have Q&A 2. You know, we've gotten so much attention lately on this podcast as it relates to viewers. The numbers have really been shooting up the last several episodes. I really want to thank Alana. I think the way this podcast is put together is basically her brainchild. We're doing Texting the Judge now. We've gotten a significant amount of outreach from folks that are listening in all the different states and countries that are listening to Beyond the Gavel. And we've really had a good time in looking at some of these things and interviewing folks. We have some really good interviews lined up in the future. But today we thought, we don't want some of these questions that have been submitted to us to go unanswered for long. Now, this is another Q&A episode. We had one earlier in the life of this podcast. It's been really exciting since we've had the addition of fan mail. It makes it a lot easier for us to talk about some of the issues, I think, which are important in the criminal justice system. The purpose of this particular podcast is to educate you, the public. So again, I want to invite all of you who have graced us with listening to this podcast to text your thoughts, any comments or any questions that you have to the show. You have no idea how grateful we are that you have given us the gift of listening to what it is that we're doing in this particular broadcast. All right, so I'll start off with the first question. This is an interesting one. Are you a real judge? If so, how are you able to do this podcast? Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I really wanted to work as a child in civil rights. When I was young, meaning elementary school, junior high, I really had a fondness for Abraham Lincoln. I loved to read, and biographies were really my favorite. I enjoyed reading about Abraham Lincoln. He was truly a hero of mine when I was a child. Then I got into early high school, and I focused a lot on Martin Luther King Jr. I was born in 1968, which is the same year that he was assassinated. And my parents, who were somewhat political at the time, really expressed to me the pain and anguish that they went through when Martin Luther King was assassinated. I was born in Oakland, California. And so in California at that time, the civil rights movement in the Bay Area was really big. My parents were somewhat involved in it. And as a result of that, Martin Luther King Jr. developed into one of my heroes. I read everything that I could related to what he did. Then I went into college. I got a degree in history. It all kind of makes sense. I needed a job, so I applied at Child Protective Services. I got in. I did that work for a while, and then I went to law school 2 years later. In law school, I really cared about the Constitution. I cared about folks' rights. And as a result of that, I ended up getting a job in the criminal law. And so I worked as a prosecutor for a couple of years in Hidalgo County. I subsequently ended up working as a defense attorney for 10 years, and then I ran for judge. The way this podcast developed is I had a really wonderful intern several years back who took it upon herself and developed this podcast because she knew that I had a genuine love of teaching. I love teaching at UTSA, which I've been doing for quite a while. And as a result of that, we've sort of taken some of the things that we talk about in the classroom into this podcast. Before we started this podcast, we contacted the state bar and the Judicial Ethics Commission, made sure that we understood all the rules. The Judicial Ethics Commission and the state bar really do want us in the public arena to do our best to educate the public. Therefore, this podcast exists. So yes, I'm a real judge. handling felony cases. I'm a state district court judge in the 379th, which handles felony cases. It starts at the death penalty level, capital cases on down to state jail felonies and everything in between. And we'll timestamp this. Today is August the 20th, 2024. We're in the middle of a high profile murder jury trial. And so got done with the jury trial. It's 6:00 now, came to the back, and now we are recording. Good question. Next question. What is the most challenging part of your job that people might not be aware of? So I first got elected as an administrative judge in Bexar County in 2015. And since that time, I have worked in an administrative capacity in various forms here within the county. People have this concept that judges generally only work while they are on the bench. And so when a judge comes in the morning, if that judge is late, 10 minutes late, 15 minutes late, people have an assumption that that judge is probably in the back drinking coffee, going out, calling cases, listening to what's going on. And as a result of that, they think that by 5 or 5:30, when the court day is over, judges go home. That is not really the life that I lead. And it's not really the life I think that a lot of judges. I generally start my day about 7:30 in the morning with a meeting because of the duties that I have as a presiding judge or administrative judge. I have a lot of duties involved with courthouse operations. What that means is I'm dealing with a lot more stuff than what you see in the courtroom. So sometimes I'm in a meeting. Meetings tend to run late. I show up to the courthouse. I'll do what I can in court, try to focus as best as I can in court. And then when it's time for lunch, sometimes I don't get much of a lunch at all. Sometimes I'll get 5-10 minutes before I got to bring in a jury or before I got to do something else related to being on the bench, or I have to have a meeting, or I have to write some documents that are related to what I do here as a judge. Next question. Is the jury room being renovated soon? And I think this is from an earlier episode we had with Julietta Schultz, who's a jury bailiff. She's very good at her job. She works here at the courthouse. She basically works at the behest of the district judges. All 27 district judges in Bexar County voted to have her in that role. She's been in there for quite a while, probably about a decade now, and she is really good at her job. You know, we have been talking to facilities here in Bexar County for a long time about that jury room. The jury room is too small. We fit about 600 folks in there on any given Monday or Tuesday, maybe a little less on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and it is packed. Generally, every single seat is taken with folks that get summoned, and they're standing in the halls on the side. They're standing in the aisles within the jury room. We've been talking to the county for a while of changing that particular jury room, trying to move it across the street. They keep telling us that that's possible. They keep telling us that they recognize that, but the county is having a very difficult situation right now. I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on here in Bexar County, but it's currently time for the budgets to be worked on and passed, not just with Bexar County, but also with the other municipalities like the city of San Antonio. In Bexar County, we have 23 municipalities. Most cities, I think, across America work the same way. You have little towns that developed around the city, and over time, the urban area sort of outgrew those towns. So now you have a big urban area with some municipal governments within them. And so in Bexar County, the budget here is just a hair under $3 billion. That's billion with a B. That's a lot of money, but there's a lot of money that goes into running a county. And so from what I've read in the media, Bexar County has the largest debt per capita for a county amongst the urban counties in Texas. And so I think the county is really concerned about not spending more money than what they want to in the next 5 years. As a result of that, things like the jury room needs may suffer. And I think that's just something that communities all across America are going through at the moment. Next question. What is a docket call? Well, docket call is really a fancy term. It doesn't mean much more than just a typical court date when a judge goes in, calls all the names that are on that particular day. So you start off by going state versus blank, and then you just kind of go through and call all the names. That's a docket call. Docket calls in Bexar County typically start at 9. Some may start a little bit earlier. Some may start a little bit later. But they're basically calling every single case that they have that day in the morning. Sometimes courts have dockets in the afternoon. I do got to say, I think our judges in Bexar County work very hard as a group. And so docket calls can be pretty lengthy. I know it is when I call the docket in the 379th. Excellent question on a docket call. This is an interesting question. What has been the biggest change amongst the judicial or justice system since you've been presiding judge? This is my 16th year on the bench. When I first came in, I really felt like it was important that we think about defendants' rights as well as victim rights on an equal type scale, right? Every single thing that either side wants to argue to the judge is something that a judge should consider. And that's something that we talk about within the system that sometimes people don't understand. If you ask an individual, what does it mean when you say justice, right? What does justice mean in a particular case? People have a tendency to look at that from their own perspective. If somebody was a victim of a crime, they'll look at it from that perspective. If somebody has a loved one who's been accused of a crime, they'll have a different perspective as to what justice means in that particular situation. And so for me, what has changed a lot are periods of reform. And I'll give you an example. I'll never forget, for me, I recognize a really big change. I was teaching in college when the Trayvon Martin case hit the media. Students immediately came at me, were asking me about Trayvon. At that time, I noticed that the class divided up into factions, which was amazing to me. Some folks were really in favor of movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, and other folks were really against that idea. And I didn't quite understand why. I started asking a lot of questions in my class, and it turned out that a lot of folks' perceptions are driven by what they see in the media. And so as a result of that, I've really seen the pendulum swing. We went from an area of thought, we went from a thought process of we should incarcerate everybody to we should question everything that the police does. And now we're kind of going back the other way. So the pendulum swinging has been absolutely amazing. Specifically, as a question is asking about the justice system in Bexar County, one of the things that we've done differently, which has been amazing, is all the additions of specialty courts that we've had in our county. I think we have 15 different specialty courts, and they handle everything from mental health specialty court to a veterans specialty court, both felony and misdemeanor. We now have a new homelessness specialty court, which is a misdemeanor type court, drug courts, DWI courts. The list goes on and on. Hope that's a good answer. Now, this is a question that it seems like one of my friends asked me because it's just teeing it up for me. How does a public defender's office differentiate from the MAC system in Bexar County? How do you decide what defendant gets what? That's an excellent question. Let me talk to you a little bit about what that means, right? In the United States, you have three basic indigent defense systems. To consider somebody to be indigent, you're basically saying, this is an individual that doesn't have the means to hire a lawyer. And because they don't have means to hire a lawyer, they need to get a court-appointed attorney. Now, there are different types of systems that handle indigent defense. One is called the assigned counsel program. The other is called the public defender's office, basically an office staffed by county employees. They're public defenders. They get paid a salary within Bexar County. All the support staff are Bexar County employees. They are housed within a facility that is paid for by Bexar County. It's basically something that is equal on the other side to the prosecutor's office, but this is on the defense side. Public defenders are salaried government employees. Generally, they're full-time defense specialists. They're assigned to provide legal representation to indigent defense. In Bexar County, 88% of folks that get arrested don't have the ability to hire a lawyer. And so when they get to the jail and they're asked questions related to whether or not they can afford an attorney, if they cannot afford an attorney, they could be assigned an attorney on the wheel. Now, when we refer to the MAC system, we're basically talking about a system where defense attorneys are appointed to represent individuals on a particular case. Now, the MAC office, the Managed Assigned Counsel office, coordinates this assignment of private attorney. Currently, there's about 250 attorneys that have signed up, that have taken the classes, they've done the legal education. They basically have agreed to represent defendants that don't have the means to hire somebody on a contracted case-by-case basis. These are not county employees, but basically private lawyers that are almost, in a sense, private contractors with the county. Now, the manager assigned counsel office basically manages the administration of this wheel, which includes making attorney appointments. They oversee case assignments. They respond to any complaints that are made about lawyers on the wheel system. They process the vouchers, make sure that attorneys get paid, that investigators get paid, any sort of experts get paid that have been appointed to represent defendants. They provide the resources and training to make sure that there's quality control of this particular wheel, make sure that all the private attorneys are paid per case or paid hourly, but they do operate independently as opposed to being employees of the county like the public defender's office. Now, when you have a public defender's office, it's important that you have another way to assign counsel, because let's say that you have 3 individuals that are charged with a crime, and all 3 individuals charged with this crime are pointing the finger at the other saying, this other person made me do it. Yes, I may have been involved, but I'm not the ringleader. Or let's say that out of the 3 individuals, somebody's been to prison before. As a result of that, those 3 individuals cannot be tried at the same time if there's some sort of conflict with each other. And if there is a conflict with each other, then they need separate lawyers. And so when they get separate lawyers appointed to them, those lawyers cannot work within the same firm. Therefore, the public defender's office can only represent 1 individual out of the 3. The other 2 must be indigent lawyers appointed by some other way. MAC attorneys are panel lawyers that are private lawyers who are contracted with the county to provide indigent defense and indigent defendants. Private practitioners who have applied to be on this panel and actually have been screened and approved by the Managed Assigned Counsel program. These are excellent questions. I would say let's take a quick Q&A break, but this is a Q&A episode, so let's just otherwise take a short break. Welcome to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. I'm your host. Thank you so much for listening. Guess who I have with me today? Mary Ross.
Hello.
What about Taylor Swift?
Educating the public and expanding mindsets.
Have you heard about the podcast? Have you heard about what's happening with it? Welcome to Beyond the Gavel. This is Ron. Maybe not. We'll see.
Thank you for having me.
You are a hot commodity in San Antonio, aren't you?
I wouldn't say all that.
The day has come. You're getting ready to pick the jury.
I wanted to be an example.
Welcome. This is Ron Rangel. Let me start over on that. Welcome to Beyond the Gavel. This is Ron Rangel. How am I going to open this up? Okay. Welcome back. This is Ron. Let's go back to these questions. I am enjoying answering these for you. In the John Kuntz episode, which was an excellent episode, and by the way, I'm really grateful for all the individuals that have come in here and given up their time. Every professional that has come in here and has answered questions and talked about what it is that they do has been so gracious, so kind, and I'm very fortunate that we have had such good quality guests come on the show. This question relates to John Kuntz. In the John Kuntz episode, when you have a difficult client, are you able to get off the case, or do you have to stay and represent them? That's a great question. In reality, it truly is based on a case-by-case basis. And I'll explain. Sometimes I have defendants that come up and say, I want this lawyer off of my case. And I'll ask them why. And they'll say things like, I don't trust the lawyer. And then I'll ask them again, why don't you trust the lawyer? And then they'll say, because the lawyer hasn't filed all these motions that I've asked her or him to file. And then I'll say, okay, give me an example as to the motions that you're talking about. And then they'll go, all right, I want them to file this motion, and they refuse to file it. And then I'll tell them, well, that motion doesn't apply in this case. That motion only applies on a state jail felony case. You have a right to have an attorney of your choosing, but you don't necessarily have a right to choose the court-appointed counsel that you get. Now, there are other times when I can tell that maybe there's a conflict between the two, and if that's the case, then a true, genuine conflict, I will go ahead and allow for the attorney to get off. Other times, based on the wheel system in Bexar County, you have attorneys that might be appointed to somebody that may not be the best case for that particular lawyer. I'll give you an example. I have had a female attorney come up to me. It's been a while, and she said, Judge, you got to let me off this case. And I asked her why, and she said, this is a charge involving a sex offender, and every time I go into the jail to visit with him, He has given me this look that makes me feel extremely uncomfortable. And he tells me things that I don't think are appropriate. And I'll say, okay, obviously this individual needs a different attorney. Other times you have attorneys that are paired up with clients that are difficult in other ways. Maybe they got some mental health diagnosis that the attorney is not familiar with and really does not have the ability to handle as effectively as they could. As a result of that, we want to make sure that clients are paired up with an attorney who could most effectively represent them. All right. This is a question related to what's been in the media lately. It's an excellent question. Has the Odyssey system been fixed? Why was it updated in the first place? That's something I've been hearing quite a bit when I go to the forums. Let me tell you a little bit about Odyssey. Odyssey is the new system which we have just started in Bexar County about 2 months ago now. It was created and put in place by a company named Tyler. Now, back in about 2016, I was on this committee when we sent out requests for proposals for individuals to change our system. We have a mainframe in Bexar County that's from the 1970s. The DAWS system was created in the early 1980s. So this is a very old system. We basically were still using the green screen command system that existed before Windows became available. As a result of that, we did not have a lot of capacity within our computer system to get a lot of information at once. And because we couldn't get a lot of information at once, we couldn't improve a lot of what we were doing. It's very difficult to figure out how to make the system better if you don't have a good computer operating system to help you figure out what is successful. At that particular time, there were 5 different companies that answered the request for proposal. 3 of them had never really done a jurisdiction like Bexar County before. The other 2, Tyler being one of them, were left in the running. We asked the Bexar County auditor to do a deep dive into these 2 companies' finances, and the auditor's office told us that the other company was on the edge of bankruptcy. Subsequent to that, we did learn that that other company did have some pretty serious financial issues. Tyler was really the only company that we had left. Tyler went 2 years over the time limit that they had told us Odyssey would be available. So we knew that it was a huge job. Now, when you think about the criminal justice system that is being changed, you're talking about every single organization that operates in the courthouse in the criminal justice field that is going to be using the system. Not just the courts, but also the Bexar County Jail, with the sheriff, each of the clerk's office, that's the district clerk's office, and the county clerk's office, which are huge offices in and of themselves, the district attorney's office, the MAC system, the public defender's office, and all the different organizations that work within the county have to use this particular system. We knew that we were going to have issues. It is such a huge changeover. It would have been impossible for the transition to have been seamless and smooth. There are some issues that came up that kind of make sense, and there's issues that came up that were not anticipated. Over time, Tyler has been working with the county to make sure that the system gets fixed. I have communicated with courts and other jurisdictions that have gone through a similar switch, and they have advised me that it probably takes about a year to get all the kinks out, which is a very long period of time on paper, but in reality, there are so many convoluted type issues that we come up with at the courthouse that kind of makes sense. All right, here's another good question, and one that I hear quite often. I've been seeing a lot of stories in the news about violent attacks and murders taking place all over San Antonio. Are violent crimes up? In fact, I was asked that exact same question at the Neighborhood Association forum that I was at last night. The answer to that is no. Violent attacks or murders are not up. It may seem like that only because you got to think about what sells in the media. The media is selling a product. As a result of the media selling a product, they want to make sure that the headlines, they want to make sure that the stories that they write are going to have enough impact for folks to want to tune in or read whatever product it is that they're selling. As a result of that, crime and punishment has always been a big seller amongst those in the news. And so people watch the news or people pay attention to the news, and they have this sense that there are all these terrible things going on in our society. The reality of it is crime tends to go up and it tends to go down. I think nonviolent crime there may be a little bit of an uptick at the moment for nonviolent crime, but for violent crime, that has been going down for some time. And in fact, over the last 10 years, it's gone down pretty significantly. So I think folks within Bexar County, folks that live in San Antonio, should feel comfortable that what they see in the media is not necessarily an everyday thing. Now, this is an interesting thing, too. One of the things that we're seeing in these jury trials is that officers are now wearing a body cam every time they approach a scene. And so as a result of that, we're able to see a lot of these crimes happen in real time through these body cam. Because of technology, we have cameras all over the place. In the last death penalty trial that we had in the 379th, I cannot tell you how many videos existed of this particular crime. And so these are things that we're not used to watching, but when the media has an opportunity to show some of these violent acts, it does seem to affect all of us. And so when we watch incidences of crime happen on video, it's something that is deeply personal. It's something that may affect us in a very, very negative way. Those are the things that we remember. And so I don't think necessarily violent crime is up in San Antonio, but our perceptions of it going up make sense when you consider everything that we see in the media. Excellent question. It's one that comes up quite a bit. Can you share a memorable case that you sat on that stands out to you? Have you had a trial that's anything like the movies or TV series depict? I've had so many memorable cases. It's difficult for me to basically focus on one. I'll give you a couple of different examples of memorable cases. We are excited to bring in Kirsten Melton in the future. She's agreed to come in on the podcast. She was the prosecutor on the very first human trafficking case that we had in Bexar County. And this was involving a juvenile who was kidnapped by two brothers and held captive. It was a very heinous crime. It's one that affected everybody involved in a negative way. Ultimately, what happened was each brother in separate trials got life in prison without parole. We also tried the very first adult human trafficking case. This individual would force ladies to prostitute themselves at his behest. He forced them to do that very physically. He basically would assault them if they did not do whatever it is that he wanted. He ended up getting life in prison without parole as a result of that as well. We've had a lot of other interesting cases, and frankly, I intend to bring a lot of interesting cases in on this podcast. So hopefully you listen in. The question regarding whether or not these stories in these cases resemble anything like in the movies or in a TV series, yes, they actually do. One of the greatest things about my job is I have no idea what a case is going to present when I come into it. Sometimes people ask me, you just started a trial. What's a trial about? And I'll say, I have no idea. Judges are not allowed to know anything about these cases until they come before them in a jury trial. And as a result of that, every day is a unique day. Every day is a surprise. And it's something that is really, really interesting to me to watch these cases unfold. One of those things I really like to participate in are these really high-profile jury trials where I see these lawyers, generally very good lawyers on both sides. There's cameras in the back. I see that the lawyers the first day or two are kind of nervous, right? They're trying to make sure that they do a good job for their side. I see the jockeying between them. And jury trials always start off with the three of us, the judge, the state, and the defense attorneys sort of jockeying for position, sort of jockeying to sort of set the tone as to where they're going in their particular case. Sometimes that means I need to assert myself a little bit in the beginning to let the parties know I'm the judge. I'm the one who's running this court. I'm the one who's running the proceedings in this court. I'm going to let you present all the evidence that you think is important. I'm going to allow you to do everything within the rules to argue for your side. But ultimately, everybody's behavior within the court is appropriate. Hey, here's a good question, and I don't know if it's based specifically on me. Maybe it's somebody who's had an opportunity to come into the courtroom and observe. The question is, how have you mastered being unbiased as a judge? Excellent question. I would like to think that I am very unbiased. As a judge, I have learned very, very quickly that the things that I do in court are going to affect jurors or other folks that are watching the case. So I go out of my way not to show bias. Now, I also am very, very good at not feeling bias during the course of a case. So if a defendant is testifying, I'm not looking at the defendant like, what did this person do wrong? I'm looking at this case like, what are the elements? What is the state trying to prove? What is it that the state is required to prove? How are the witnesses testifying? How does the evidence look to me? Let me analyze the evidence and try to figure out what is fair. I think as a judge, it's very significant that when we rule, we speak to both sides in an equal manner. I do my best not to look at a jury because I don't want the jury to get the wrong impression. I'll give you an idea as to how something like this has worked. One time at the end of a jury trial, I went to the back. I thanked the jury for their service. One juror told me, I noticed when this particular witness was testifying, you kind of looked up and you looked at them and then you looked down. So I could tell that you didn't believe what that juror said. And I said, no, that's not the case at all. It's very difficult for anybody to sit in a very stoic position, not moving for a very long period of time. Sometimes I got to look up from my computer because I look at what's on the computer. Through the miracle of modern day technology, I can generally see what the court reporter is writing as the testimony is going on, because I want to make very certain that if there's an objection, I know that the appellate courts are only able to see the written word, what is black and white. And sometimes when you hear a statement in person and you read it at the same time that it's being said, you'll catch a word or a phrase that is unlike what you thought you heard. So it's very important for me, I think, to try to make sure that I rule in a way that the appellate courts recognize how it is that I'm ruling. As a result of that, I do my best not to look up and look at the jury or look at the witnesses or look at the parties because I don't want to give the jury the wrong impression. And so one time in a jury trial, I just happened to look up for whatever reason, and a juror misinterpreted that as me looking at the witness in a way that maybe showed that I didn't believe what the witness was saying. I told that jury that's not true. I just happened to look in that direction. I never really feel any sort of favoritism for one side or the other in a case, and I never really feel favoritism for a piece of evidence or against a piece of evidence. I simply try to follow the rules and do what I think is fair in that particular trial. It's an excellent question, and I appreciate the sentiment. Since we've started the new fan mail edition of this podcast, we've gotten some great comments from folks that are listening and have wanted to relate some of the things that they thought. And I thought I would share a couple of those comments with you. I love the show with defense counsel Jason Goss. And by the way, I did too. I hope you can have more shows about attorneys' best cases. Their passion really came across in the Goss episodes. I really agree with that comment and that sentiment. One thing that I've noticed is that when attorneys talk about something that they're passionate about, it really comes through in this podcast. And so I really appreciate those attorneys that we've had come in and talk about those stories. Here's another piece of fan mail. Can you share more stories from attorneys about the cases that they're most proud of or memorable? These are very good comments, and based on the reaction that we're getting, we're definitely going to try to do more of that. I want to thank all you listeners again for sharing your thoughts and your questions. We've reached the end of the episode. This is one of my favorite things to do. Sit in front of this mic, do what I can to talk about the criminal justice system. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and keep sending in those questions. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
You've been listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. Join us in the next 2 weeks where we're educating the public and expanding mindsets. Head to our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform to subscribe to the latest episodes and updates.